Why do we need to translate medicalese? It's in English, right? Sure it is. Listen, health is about people. Imagine a sci-fi story about two worlds divided by a force field. Humans live on one side, they look through the force field, and they see on the other side transparent containers that things just happen in and happen to. At the end of the story, we discover that the force field is actually a mirror that makes people invisible. If a person does something, it seems to just happen. And if something happens to a person, it seems to happen in a clear container. Well, that's medical writing. And where the story ends, we begin. The scientific literature of medicine presents a world of biochemical fact in which patients are like jars that have things happen in them and to them with no people involved. The authors want to be scientific and objective, so they see subjectivity as a taint. To err, or if you wish, is human, so be inhuman. But humans are doing all of this. Human researchers are choosing what to research and how to evaluate it, and human doctors are making decisions and taking actions on the basis of this information, and they're doing it to treat humans. Oh, no, though. The body is a biomechanical entity, and science is science. So, because they can't actually remove human subjectivity, they make it invisible and pretend they've removed it. So, here are some typical examples. I'll read this because it might be hard to see. Yeah. Examination revealed a hypertensive subject with no evident complications. Chest radiographs revealed progressive consolidation at a new right pleural effusion. A chest tube was placed in the left pleural space. This subgroup analysis suggests temsirolimus is indicated as first-line treatment in all renal cancer histological subtypes for patients with poor prognosis. Ergometrine is contraindicated in severe or persistent sepsis. Okay, these all use technical jargon, which is a barrier of its own, but they also remove people. There are between these 6 conjugated verbs. 3 are in passive voice with no explicit agent. The other 3 have non-human subjects. Examination revealed. Chest radiographs revealed. We're going to go to a strip bar and watch those chest radiographs. This subgroup analysis suggests, not the author of the subgroup analysis, no. The humans with the problems are a subject, patients, or not even noticed. It's like looking into a glass container and seeing situations such as progressive consolidation, pleural effusion, and sepsis, and individual physiological details such as the left pleural space, which is over here. If you find this jarring, you're the jar. Even if we leave most of the jargon intact, we can turn away from the mirror and we can see the humans. When I examined person, I found they had hypertension but no complications that I could detect. Still leaves in hypertension, which means high blood pressure, but there's a person. We did chest radiographs and found person's lungs had progressive consolidation and a new right pleural effusion, jargon. We placed a chest tube in person's left pleural space. On the basis of our subgroup analysis, we recommend you use temsirolimus as a first choice to treat people who have renal cancer of all histological subtypes and a poor prognosis. Do not use ergometrine to treat anyone who has severe or persistent sepsis. See, we still have to translate terms such as hypertension, pleural space, and sepsis. Oh, of course. Those are look-upable. At least now we're dealing with humans. And since health is a human issue that humans experience and other humans treat, you can't really do it without humans. So, when you're communicating medical information, you have to start with the same question you should start with in all communication. Who is involved and why? Who is speaking? Who is listening? What side does each want out of it? You're sitting there listening, hoping for information. I'm standing here talking, happy to have an audience. Let's look at the different sets of people involved in medicalese, medical writing. Medical researchers want to sound objective, factual, impartial, and unbiased. And by the way, when I post this video on YouTube, it will include the slides, so you'll be able to read them up close and personal-like. But I basically made bullet points of what I'm saying. I was expecting a much larger screen, but what can you do? They erase the person, thereby disowning any errors and pretending no subjective judgment was involved. They also use in-group terminology. Publishers of medical information want to make sure it won't hurt anyone or get them sued. These are separate issues. Lawsuits can come from manufacturers. You can hurt people without getting sued, and you can get sued without hurting people. They want to make money, of course, and they want the right people to read what they publish. Who are the right people? If the publishers are publishing medical journals, they want other researchers to read and cite it. If they're publishing health information for regular people, the patients probably aren't the ones paying. If they're publishing online, the content is probably sponsored, and the readers are actually what they're selling the sponsors. Remember, if you get something for free, you're the product. They want to make the information effective for their sponsors, but in order to get the readers and not to get sued, they have to make the information acceptably accurate and balanced. You can balance it different ways. You can balance by giving full information on all sides, or you can balance it by giving minimal information on all sides. These are, as long as it's balanced. If they're publishing on paper as opposed to on screen, unless it's a book that you buy in a store, it's a free publication paid for by a health organization or a private company, such as a manufacturer. If it's a book that they're selling to the readers, it has to have a catchy story, which brings us to journalists. Journalists and similar writers tend to want the story, which is seldom balanced. They prefer to get personal stories, and they want to make them representative. Does this cause this trouble? We talked to 3 people on the street and they thought so. They often conflate people's impressions with established facts. And the standard operating assumption is that if there's a good side and a bad side to a story, the bad side is the real truth. Meanwhile, ordinary people who aren't in the medical system just want to know, what's wrong with me and what can I do about it? Or, is there something wrong with me? And if so, what can I do about it? Patients in the medical system want to know, what do I need to do? What should I expect? How will it help me? How can it hurt me? What are my other options? Your ordinary readers want to know the technical terms, because they're going to be seeing them again and it makes them feel smart, but they don't want to be overloaded. They want nice, clear, tidy ideas that they can make reasonable decisions on and do non-ridiculous things about. Non-ridiculous means don't tell people who get 6 hours of sleep on work nights that they should get up at 7 on weekends too to keep their sleep schedule the same. Believe me, odds of my adhering to that advice are well below 0. So, when you're writing or editing for ordinary people, you need to ask and answer, who is doing what? Who is experiencing what? Who is telling whom to do what? Why are they telling them that? And what will happen? For researchers, health is a problem like math. For ordinary people, health is a problem like a car breakdown. They want to do something about it now. They don't want to just know, the friction coefficient on their tires. They want to make decisions and take actions on it, but they're asking for your help in doing so. So it's not just a simple translation, it's an interpretation. This isn't like translating instructions for a VCR. Does anybody know what a VCR is?
Yeah. Does anyone still have one?
Well, it doesn't work though. This is like translating poetry. But before you can make things clear for your readers, you have to make sure you have them clear for yourself. So I'm going to start with things that matter in both the understanding and the telling. And then after that, I'll get down to the extra things you need to think about in the telling. So, number 1, truth is only true in context. All facts require other facts for you or anyone to understand them. We normally take it for granted that if you say something true, you're covered, but there are times where people don't have the full context and may infer wrong context and then will come to the wrong conclusion. I remember one time I was seeing a doctor and I noticed that somebody had accidentally, one of his staff had left a medical journal in his waiting room, so I just picked it up to bring it in to him because I knew he didn't want it out there. And I walked into his office and he saw me carrying this medical journal. He said, "Why are you holding that journal?" Because he thought I had some ideas from it. I thought, oh, no, believe me. I don't have the context to understand this. I know that. But I'll be giving you some good examples shortly. And a related point is, no story is ever the whole story. There's always more. It's never simple. You are going to have to decide how much information to give so that they understand the situation in a reasonable and balanced way. So, here's a real-life example. There's a medication you can take to help treat osteoporosis. It's widely prescribed. The studies show that it has a 50% relative risk reduction. For every 2 people who would normally suffer hip fractures, with this medication, only 1 of them will. So that sounds great, huh? Well, that's relative risk reduction. Here's some more numbers. In the set of people it's approved for treating, 2 out of 100 will have hip fractures if they're untreated. If they all take the pill, 1 in 100 will have a hip fracture. Congratulations. You just learned the difference between relative risk reduction and absolute risk reduction. This drug has an absolute risk reduction of 1%. So that's bad, right? They're bamboozling us with fancy numbers. It just doesn't make any difference for 98 people. Folks, most medications will make no apparent difference for most people taking them, but we don't know which ones they will make a difference for. Millions of people wear seat belts that may never actually save their lives, and which they're hoping, in fact, they will never be in a position to need. But just in case, you know. If you're choosing between 2 treatments and the doctor says, well, with this one you have a 1 in 50 chance of being hospitalized, with this one you have a 1 in 100 chance, you'll say, okay, why wouldn't I take the 1 in 100 one? So the drug is good then, right? Well, it has side effects. If you lie down within a certain period of time after taking it, you're likely to suffer damage to your esophagus. So maybe you look around for other things that similarly reduce your risk of fracture, if there are any, without increasing your risk of damage to your insides. But you need all this information to make a sensible decision. And people who are translating medicalese need to make sure that they're giving information that will be important and giving it in a manner and context that will make it easier to understand. And if you're working on a story in a newspaper or magazine, always remember the story is not the whole story. The hook, the thing that grabs the eyes, what drives the narrative, needs context, often a lot of context. So, a favorite example, sorry. The Toronto Star in 2015 published a story about Gardasil, the HPV vaccine. The headline was, "A Wonder Drug's Dark Side." First 2 sentences. Hundreds of thousands of teen girls in Canada have safely taken Gardasil, a vaccine shown to prevent HPV. But a Star investigation has found that since 2008, at least 60 Canadians experienced debilitating illnesses after inoculation. So that's about 10 a year, which is 10 more than anyone would want. On the other hand, it's a rate of somewhere about 0.01%. The article went straight into the case of one active young woman who has had debilitating pain since receiving the vaccine. When she was getting it, the school nurse asked her if she had any allergies. She said, "Yes, I'm allergic to metal." The nurse gave her the shot. The vaccine, as it happens, contains aluminum salts. So, it's quite possible that the vaccine caused her muscle pain, but all medications are contraindicated in hypersensitivity, which translates to, if you are allergic to it, you should not get it. Literally every single set of prescribing instructions says that the medication must not be given to people who are allergic to any of the ingredients. Now, the instructions for Gardasil are, of course, no exception. Gardasil has 6 inactive ingredients, which is a normal number. In fact, it's on the small side. They're listed in the prescribing information because they always are. The first one listed is aluminum, the first one. The nurse who gave the injection had as much responsibility for knowing about that as a school cook has a responsibility for knowing about peanuts in the soup. The article did say, for balance, that 400 women, Canadian women, die of cervical cancer each year, that the vaccine protects against viruses that cause 70% of those cases, and that a study found that it prevented nearly 100% of precancerous growths related to those viruses. So this works out to potentially saving up to 280 lives each year in the long term, an calculation that the authors didn't make explicitly. But that information was also buried well into the story, and anytime they gave a bit of information like that, they would quickly turn back to quoting people who were concerned or critical. Balance is not balance if you shout about one side and whisper the other. In the examples I've just given, you may be wondering whether the pharmaceutical manufacturers are the good guys or the bad guys. The next thing I'm going to tell you is that's not what you should be asking. Think cause and effect, not good and evil. Keep morals out of this. That's a thing I say many times in many places, but it really matters here. I expand on this point in an article that's just gone up on the Editors Canada blog. And on your handouts, there's a lot of terms to watch out for. So if you work in health information, you know that people have a lot of moral attitudes towards things. Not just this is effective and that's not, but you are a good person if you do this and a bad person if you do that. But it's more subtle. It's more subtle than that. We use a lot of moral value-laden terms without even thinking twice about how loaded they are. Natural. Natural. If it's not natural, what is it? Unnatural. Which is evil. I shouldn't even need to tell you why pure has moral overtones. Sick also has moral overtones that you can't ever completely bleach out of it. Though the younger generation is doing a bang-up job on that. Dude, that's sick. There are many more things that have moral freight and value judgments attached to them than just what's on the handout. Let me read you a sentence from a 2015 article in the Toronto Star. Yes, they did a whole series of these. On non-prescription painkillers that have small amounts of codeine added. Low doses of codeine can be sold without a prescription as long as the opiate, which is derived from the opium poppy, is cut with 2 non-narcotic ingredients and stored behind the counter. So, it's from the opium poppy. Nice vivid image there of a thing that is associated with the production of heroin in foreign countries. They also reminded us that it's a narcotic. Narcotics, an alarming word that carries images of an evil underworld, also often full of scary foreign people, just by the way. And then there's is cut. The clinical term would be compounded. You could also say mixed or any of many other terms. Where is the word cut normally used? One place, in reference to illegal drugs. They are using deliberately, consciously, a term that is strongly associated with street drugs to describe a product you buy in a pharmacy. Words are known by the company they keep, and cut keeps bad company when you're talking about drugs. And when you talk about drugs, you often talk about addiction. I remember reading about the father of a child who was dying of cancer. The kid had a few months to live and he was in terrible pain. The hospital wanted to give him opiates. The father said, "I don't want my son to become an addict." His son is dying. He can die in pain or not in pain. Why would any father want his son to die in pain? Because he hears opiate and he thinks addiction, and he doesn't think, oh, addiction, well, he'll get over it when he dies. No, he thinks addiction and he thinks bad person or moral failure. He doesn't want his kids to die a bad person. It's also not our business to say the father is a bad father for making his child suffer for what we might think is a terrible reason. It's our business to help him have useful facts that will help him make a decision that will do the best for his son, and to give them to him in a way he's most likely to be receptive to. And to be prepared for the possibility that he's not going to listen anyway, but we do what we can. It's not enough not to make moral judgments. It's not enough to take them out where we see an author making them. We have to recognize that readers will make them too, and we have to take care to address them, and to address them in ways that the people making them will listen to. It's not going to be easy. You're not always going to succeed. Any good translator gets the connotation right, not just the denotation. Facts don't stay in glass jars. They live in human brains. I've included a list of some loaded terms in your handouts. As I mentioned, it's not possible to make an exhaustive list. Frankly, all words are loaded at least a little. Always pay attention. Some have very light loads and some have very heavy loads. It's our job as word professionals to be aware of these loads. And some things are more freighted in one context than another. And just because something has moral overtones doesn't mean you must avoid it. Sometimes you can't avoid it, but you should be aware of them and work with them in mind. Take the time to read that. I really don't have time to go through them with you here, but you have it on paper, so it's very good. Because being unhealthy is generally thought of as bad, terms we have for health conditions are often loaded, especially if they essentialize the health condition. Who you are talking to and why and how will they take it, and how will other people you're not specifically addressing but who will also read what you're writing take it. Chronic conditions such as diabetes and multiple sclerosis often develop communities and become tied to the identities of people who have them. And if you're talking to them or about them, that's a good idea to get a real sense of what people in the specific community you're talking to or about prefer. Ask them. Other things such as deafness or hearing impairment, or what term you want to use, or what term they ask you to use, blindness and autism, are often central to the identities of those who have them, and not everyone with such an identity considers it a health issue. Reduced hearing may be a medical condition, but deaf with a capital D is an identity. Hearing impaired contains impaired, which is negatively valued. It's something I can get thrown in jail for if I'm driving while. Always ask the people you're talking about. Better still, pass the mic to them, so to speak. Interview them, quote them, study what they write. You may have heard the phrase, nothing about us without us. But remember also, communities of people with any given attribute or health condition are communities of people. And people are different. They'll have different points of view. So you can't get the opinion of one or two and say it speaks for all of them. Speaking of problematic vocabulary, there are quite a few terms that are used dryly in medicalese that non-medical people are likely to misunderstand and may have big feelings about. Some of them can be translated. Some can be explained. Be careful about using most of them in text for ordinary people. They're on your handout. I put a bunch of them on your handout. Peruse it at your leisure, at your extensive pleasure. It's wonderful. Keep it ready to hand. And then there's the most famous kind of medical vocabulary. A lot of medical terminology is put together using a linguistic Lego kit made of Greek and Latin roots. Your handout has a list of pieces of that kit worth knowing that you may or may not be familiar with. And I've left off ones that everybody knows. And I've left out some ones that you will probably never see. I've bolded ones that people may get mixed up. So, for instance, colostomy means making a hole in the colon, not removing it. Ostomy, os, mouth, ostomy, hole. Otomy, with the tome, cutting up. Ectomy, ectomy literally means removing, taking out. Ankylosing spondylitis may look like it has to do with the ankles, but as you can see from the roots on your handouts, it's a swelling of the spine that involves bending. Basically, it's a kind of arthritis that fuses vertebrae. Two problems with technical jargon are that A, it's scary looking, and B, people don't always handle it correctly. This can lead to a two-edged phenomenon whereby people may be needlessly scared by a term and may not even be getting the right term. Anytime a news story starts with, "It's called," ask yourself two things. First, are they sensationalizing something fairly normal? The answer is fairly often yes. It's called dihydrogen oxide. Second, is it really called that? People in the news like catchy terms, but they also hate terms that they can't easily say. My favorite example of this is phenylpropanolamine, which used to be an active ingredient in some cold medicines. When an advisory came out about it, some people on the evening news didn't want to deal with the word so they looked around and they saw that it was abbreviated in some literature as PPA. So they came on the news and they said, "It's called PPA." And they talked about how you had to be careful about PPA. And they never said the word phenylpropanolamine. And the problem is that the medication package didn't say PPA. If you picked up a medication package that contained this, nowhere on it would you see PPA. You would see phenylpropanolamine. You might find that a difficult word, but you're not helping people if they want to look out for PPA and they don't know that the package is going to say phenylpropanolamine. Look things up to find out more about them, but know what sources are reliable. Years ago, I would not have pointed people to Wikipedia, but for things such as medical terminology, the main problem with it now is just that some of the explanations are too high level. They seem to have been copied from old textbooks. Look for other authoritative sources, anything from the government, American or Canadian, although if you're looking up official recommendations and guidelines, they vary from country to country, sometimes quite considerably. A few commercial sites are reliable. The Mayo Clinic is safe. So is medbroadcast.com, a Canadian site that I used to work for. Any major organization such as the American Cancer Society is trustworthy, but look to make sure you're reading a recent article and take the information in context. Yes?
May I just also suggest with large advocacy groups that you check who is in the advocacy group as the leadership, going on with your nothing about us without us. If it's all parents and professionals, but not people with lived experiences or the diagnosis that you're writing about, be cautious.
Thank you. Excellent point. I know that people in the world of autism have long had a great problem with that, and I'm sure it's true in other fields too, but where the people heading up the advocacy group are not people with the condition. They're parents, they're healthcare professionals, and they may have paternalistic attitudes. Some of them may have Munchausen by proxy, if you know what that means. And if you haven't heard of the organization, or if they appear to have a specific thing they're promoting, don't take their word. Even on seemingly straightforward things, do double check. Many of these organizations are strongly funded by a company that has a specific angle. You need to know what that angle is. And if you're working with a clinical reviewer or anyone who is a healthcare professional, ask them first if you can. They have the background to understand the information in context. It's their job to know. So in other words, query. It's not your job to be a clinical reviewer if you don't have the clinical background. Now, speaking of authorities and sources, if you've been given medical information to translate into ordinary English, that information came from someone. It may have come from an advocacy group giving statistics or similar general information. Statistics can sound impressive, but they need context. Truth is only true in context. I'm going to talk more about statistics in a couple of minutes. It may have come from a professional body giving a consensus statement or treatment guidelines put together by a group of experts based on their available facts, experience, and perspectives. It may have come from a government body giving an advisory, for instance. That will typically be on the basis of something such as adverse event reports. People taking the drugs saying, hey, I was taking this drug and this thing happened to me. My body did this or that. When a drug is on the market, people involved in its use or promotion, the company, the manufacturer, and anybody promoting it, has an obligation to record apparent bad side effects. And it may have come from a clinical study. If it's in the news, there was probably a news release about the study. News releases about studies tend to do what they can to make the study sound newsworthy. They're news releases. If you have access to the study, you should look at the actual study, or at least the abstract introduction and conclusion, understanding that there may be bits that you don't quite accurately understand. Nonetheless, you may find the statements there to be more qualified and less dramatic, and I will give you an example shortly. Even if you don't have academic library access, you will be able to read the abstract online. Those are always published open, even if the rest of it you have to pay to see. And it's going to be more measured and qualified than a press release. Now, there are several kinds of clinical studies, and I don't have the time here today to go into detail about the differences between them and their relative reliability. So all I can say is read up on them. These slides you probably can't see and don't want to copy down. http://guides.mclibrary.duke.edu/ebm tutorial/study-types. But these slides will be available online. So you have your data, you look at the clinical study, you read the abstract, you read as much of the rest as you need to answer your questions. You get your results. The results are numbers. Of course they are. What do these numbers stand for and what do they mean? Mind the math. If the numbers come from a published study, that study has looked for a specific effect in a specific population sample over a specific period of time. That's what studies actually do. They don't find universal truths. It reports what effect it discerned and whether that effect was statistically significant. So first of all, what is significant? Let's say someone is studying a treatment for inability to dance. We'll say the study treatment is ethanol 12 milliliters in solution with 18 milliliters taken orally. In other words, they're doing a shot of vodka. They have self-rating and other rating on a 5-point scale. The self-rating improves because, of course it does. But hey, the other rating, what other people say about the participant's ability to dance, also improves significantly. Now, what does that mean? So we look at the study and we find that in the study group, and I'm not even going to go into who the study group was because that's a whole other set, there is a mean improvement of 0.2 on a 5-point scale. It's statistically significant. P is less than 0.05. What that means is that the odds are better than 19 and 20, that their sample is representative of the results you get if you tried those on absolutely everyone. That's an arbitrary cutoff, but it's what everyone in science has agreed to accept. I think most of you know that. So the idea is that 19 out of 20 studies with a peak value of 0.05 or less are actually reflecting the truth. That's the idea. But 3 things to step back and look at. The first is the effect size. The improvement was 0.2 out of 5. Now they are confident that you get a 0.2 out of 5 improvement. But come on! So you can dance 1/25th better than before? What does that even mean? If this were rating pain improvement, would you pay for a pill that they could say confidently would improve your pain by 1/25th? Always look at the effect size. Second is a thing called p-hacking. It's when researchers measure a number of different things and then base the published study on the one that gives statistically significant results. This is especially popular in retrospective studies of populations where you dredge the data to find what correlations will make the 0.05 cutoff. So say you want to see if you can find a candy bar that will make people less likely to have heart attacks. You look at data on 20 of them. One of them gives you correlation with p equals 0.05. Congratulations, you just found the one time out of 20 that the effect is not representative. But you have a study you can publish. There's a great XKCD comic strip on this too. So here's the third thing. Studies that don't produce significant results tend not to be published. Published studies are the ones that give publishable results, which means 1 in 20 is not 1 in 20. It's like those people who publish books on how to win the lottery. People who don't win don't publish books. That doesn't mean they don't exist. So, watch out with statistics, especially correlations and suggested causes. The explanation someone suggests for data is not necessarily the real cause. There's a great web page, tylervigen.com. I didn't look up to see whether he's Vigen, Vision, what. So anyway, tylervigen.com, that lists a number of wonderful dodgy correlations. The number of people who drowned by falling into a pool in any given year correlates well with the number of films Nicolas Cage has appeared in. Now, this is obviously a perfectly reliable correlation, and there's no reason to think that that's spurious, but just for number of letters in the winning word of the Scripps National Spelling Bee correlates well with the number of people killed by venomous spiders, which is obviously spurious because bees are insects and spiders are arachnids. Percentages are not quantities. This is a mistake that many people make all the freaking time. A percentage is not an amount, it's a relationship. It's tempting to treat them like quantities, but you just can't. They often can't be compared with even with other percentages, and you certainly can't compare them with hard quantities. So if Mars bars outsell Coffee Crisp 2-to-1 in your store, that's by 100%. And on the other hand, deep fried haggis outsells tripe chips 3-to-1. That's by 200%. That does not mean that deep fried haggis is better than Mars bars. It turns out that you sell in a week 100 Mars bars, 50 Coffee Crisps, 15 deep fried haggis, and 5 tripe chips. So we need to know this. Okay. So far, I've been talking about what you need to know so you fully understand what you're translating. Now, I'm going to give the writing tips on how to convey it most effectively. The thing you need to do is tell them what they want to know, but make sure they get what they need to know. I have a suspicion that people with small children understand this instinctively. At least in matters of feeding. Your responsibility as a writer or editor is to convey the information as clearly and effectively as possible. You're communicating from people to people. Your readers have questions. They have things they want to know. They will look for these things. Make sure to tell them if you can, unless it's irresponsible to do so. But also make sure they find out what they need to know that they might not be looking for. Put it where they can't miss it. If I'm reading about a drug, I'll want to know. Thank you. If it works, well, that's good data. Side effects, everybody wants to know the side effects too. What I need to know about the side effects is not just what they are, but how likely they are, and how they stack up against the beneficial effects of the drug, and how likely those beneficial effects are. Vivid is read as important. Some antibiotics have a possible side effect called black hairy tongue. This sounds dreadful. I wake up every other morning with, no, I'm kidding. It's actually that the little papillae on your tongue get longer so they look like hair, and they turn black. It looks gross. but it's not unduly harmful, and it goes away. I mean, it's harmful to your social life, but the odds of getting black hairy tongue are typically something under 1%. The odds of an untreated bacterial infection making you very sick for a very long time and possibly killing you are much more than 1% in some cases. It is our responsibility in communicating health information to make sure that we present information clearly and engagingly in such a way that people will read it and will make accurate assessments. Make statements vivid and memorable in proportion with their importance to the extent possible. Black hairy tongue is very vivid. I have the whole comic book series. Increased risk of mortality is not very vivid. Unpleasant changes in tongue appearance is accurate without being too shocking. 1 in 20 people over age 65 will die from this infection if it's not treated. May seem scary, but if it's accurate, it's accurate. When you're translating health information, it's both how you translate it and what you choose to translate. Watch what you commit to. Don't promise more than you can. Don't say, if you have these things, then you have this condition. Only doctors can diagnose. Any doctor will tell you that, many of them even if you don't ask them. Don't oversimplify things. Don't say something will do a thing or will help. Remember that these results are based on studies that show an average effect some specified percentage of the time in a specific study population. So, giving talks causes dry mouth with an increased frequency of 0.6 times. Never mind. 3 people, you may have heard this analogy, 3 people are riding on a bus through a country that they've never been in before. They look out the window and they see 2 cows in profile, and both are purple. So, one of them says, cows around here are purple. The second one says, at least 2 cows around here are purple. The third one says, at least one side of each of at least 2 cows appears purple in this light. Sorry, folks, as much as it might be easy and make a good story to be the first person, as much as you feel like you might have done your job being the second person, you gotta be that third person. If you want to be the life of the party, go to a party. You only know what you know. And anytime you want to make something simpler or clearer or catchier, if it involves any kind of restatement, your editors, you know this, ask. If you have a clinical expert, a healthcare professional who is the author or reviewer, ask them if you can. If they want to insist on a term or turn of phrase that you know your audience is unlikely to understand, it's still your job to make it clearer, but not to make it misleading. Let me put it another way. Write and edit like you could get sued for misleading someone, because depending on who you're working for and who their clients are, you could. And even if you couldn't, do you want to hurt people? No, the people who are reading it. I'm sure most people have some people. No. Okay, never mind. Make it readable is the final big thing here. Let me give you a few writing tips for making your renditions as clear and effective as possible and freeing it from the icy clutches of medical speak. These are tips. These are not solid rules. Not following them will not mean that you have bad grammar. Following them religiously is not enough by itself and is not always the right thing to do. But as guidelines, they will help you make the writing smoother, more human, and more effective. More words may be better. Short, tight phrasing can sometimes put a lot of burden on the reader to fill in the gaps and work things out. Okay, it's fewer words to say, we found flax digestion difficulties in irritable bowel patients, than it is to say, we found that people with irritable bowel syndrome can have difficulty digesting flax. But the shorter one is more work for the mind. Show the connections. Every piece you leave implied is the piece the reader has to supply. It does use mental energy. Reduce the noun count. Now this sounds like one of these BS prescriptions, but it is useful up to a point. It's possible to use too many words. They experienced difficulties in the digestion of flax can be reduced to they had difficulty digesting flax. But do you want to know what that harder to digest sentence has in common with the other one I just gave you? They both turn too many things into nouns. Nouns are the most solid part of grammar. Scientists like them for that because they give a thingness that you can hold on to. But conjunctions, adjectives, and verbs help things flow better. They're like verbal fiber. When you're looking at a text to see how you can make it more effective, look to see if you can convert some noun-heavy constructions to ones with more verbs and adjectives. Reduce the use of is and are. And I say this because if you have a lot of is and are, you probably have a lot of nouns that could be turned into other things. You may also have a lot of passive voice. Passive voice is not bad grammar, and sometimes it's the right thing for putting the focus on what's on the receiving end. But medicalese likes it too much for reasons already gone over. So count your is and your are. And again, when I'm saying decrease and reduce and increase, I'm talking on the order of up to 10%, not like 50% or 100%. Sometimes small changes do produce important effects. Dancing 1/25th better may actually result in you getting a date with the person. Who knows? Cut down on empty it. If you're using a lot of constructions like it has been observed that, you're leaving people out. Whenever possible, add people back. If it has been observed, who observed it? I mean, is there some it standing in the corner and hulking, spewing out scientific facts? Keep an eye on prepositions. In, of, on, by, for, so on. They're, of course, useful and necessary, but they very often introduce nouns. Not always. I'm not telling you to eliminate them. I'm telling you to look at what's near them. In difficulty in the digestion of flax, there are two prepositions, in and of. One of them leads to a noun that could be a participle. You make it difficulty digesting flax, then you get rid of both prepositions. But if you have a noun stack like alcohol intake reduction, you can destack the nouns by making it reducing the intake of alcohol. Or in some contexts, you could just say drinking less alcohol. Be direct. Whenever you can, address the reader directly, especially if you're giving information on a specific thing that they're looking at because they want to know what to do. Tell them to use these eye drops, wash your hands first, don't touch the applicator tip. Tell your doctor if you have this allergy or that medical condition. Write it or edit it like you have someone sitting in front of you saying, "So what am I supposed to do?" Talk about what to do and what happens. There is no just saying. No such thing as I'm just saying. There's just so you know. No. Readers want to know things so they can do things about those things. So, not this medication may interact with grapefruit juice, but don't drink grapefruit juice with this medication. If you do, you'll be at a higher risk of side effects. It's a fascinating thing. Grapefruit juice is metabolized with the CYP3A4. Never mind. Illustrate. Don't say half an inch in diameter or a centimeter in diameter. If you can say about the size of a dime or whatever. I haven't measured dimes. I didn't have the dime. But make sure your real-world analogies are unambiguous things readers can relate to. Readers of all age groups. Dial phones are out. VCRs are out. Give signposts. If you can, put important information in bold or add call-outs that emphasize it. If you're on the web and there's a lot of information, see if you can give a clickable index at the top. People are treating this as reference. They're going through it, they're hunting for what they want to know. Make it easy, not hard. This is not some weird sport. You are not wearing jungle khakis and carrying around AK-47s, which apparently are very expensive. Mind the SQ. What is the SQ? The snicker quotient. It's the likelihood that something will make a reader snicker at a possible misreading. They can see what it means, they understand it, but they can also see what it doesn't mean but could be twisted to mean. We had a number of those last night at the Oops Awards. They're fun, but we're not writing comedy here. People's health is on the line. And check the reading level, but don't worship it. When you're providing health information, who's reading it? How literate are they? If you're aiming at a specific audience, who are they? If it's for a general audience, you have to keep the reading level fairly low. On the other hand, it can't be so simplistic as to be insulting, and it has to be authoritative enough for the readers to accept it. Microsoft Word has a built-in language level test called the Flesch-Kincaid test, which really does not sound like a reading level tester. It's an option you can turn on in the spelling and grammar checker, show readability statistics. It shows them after you do a spelling and grammar check on your document. By the way, ignore Word's grammar advice. It's crap. Also, don't install any other software that says it will help you write or fix your grammar. Your editors, I don't need to tell you this. I've never seen one of those I would recommend. The one software add-on I would absolutely recommend is Perfectit, which doesn't give you grammar advice. It checks your text to see if it's consistent with the style decisions you have specified. Basically, it's like a brain prosthesis. So that's different. But back to the readability statistics. They give you the following things: average sentences per paragraph, average words per sentence, average characters per word, passive sentences, Flesch reading ease, talk about your Snicker quotient, and Flesch-Kincaid grade level. The one you want to look at first is the grade level. Generally, you want to keep it under grade 8 and preferably closer to grade 5. This presentation, by the way, is at a grade 7.6 level. But when you're talking about health things, you're going to be introducing people to new technical terms, some of which are on the long side. This will increase the Flesch-Kincaid grade level. It's just a mathematical calculation. It doesn't think about things. It's just numbers. Be aware of this. You are not that likely to get your health information to grade 5 level and still make it useful and acceptable. Authoritative. It has to seem like it's authoritative. If it seems too simplistic, too low level, readers are less likely to take it seriously. You do need to use some official looking terms. You do also need to have the occasional subordinate clause to give an air of complexity of thought. It doesn't take much, but having people understand what you're saying but ignore it is not particularly better than having them try to pay attention to it but not understand it. The Flesch reading ease is a number that requires some context for comparison. You may or may not find it useful. The percentage of passive sentences is not perfectly reliable for the same reasons that the grammar checker is not perfectly reliable. If your average characters per word is much over 5, wonder why. Because even though you're introducing technical terms, you're explaining them in plain language using fluid constructions with conjunctions and so on. Your average words per sentence is usually best under 12, but if it's under 7, your text is going to seem very simple and choppy. You don't want all your paragraphs to have the same length, right? Your editors, you know this. 3 to 5 sentences is a decent average. Some newspapers prefer apparently half a sentence per paragraph. As a matter of fact, now the time is, sorry, I did have to sing, it's compulsory. Here, too long, didn't read. This is the summary for people who were napping for the past 54 minutes and 7 seconds. The high level, health is about people. People have problems they want to solve. Tell people what they want to know, but make sure they get what they need to know. The more important something is, the more vivid and salient it should be. Facts are only facts in context, and no story is the whole story. Watch out for moral judgments and loaded language. Consider what people will understand. Mind the math and keep it readable. Okay, any questions? We have 4 minutes.
Yeah. In your blog post the other day, you were talking about saying, don't say somebody has such and such, or don't call them an epileptic. Talk about I can't remember exactly what you said, but my question was, if you can't say something other than they have this disease, is there another way to say it?
Yeah, the blog post in particular was about not presenting them as like heroes in some
Right.
sort of fictional morality. The thing is that we need to remember, some authors will be like, he tragically died. Look, we understand that death is a bad thing. Somebody was asking, well, if a person has, I said, for instance, don't say they're lucky if they got in a car accident and only had 2 broken legs instead of being killed. It's not lucky to break both legs. They're saying, how do you express the badness of being in hospital with 2 broken legs? And I think the fact is that most of us understand that it really sucks to be in the hospital with 2 broken legs. I think that we can give straightforward facts about physical injuries and sicknesses without having to use loaded language, because we all know that these things are unpleasant. If you're not sure that the language makes it clear how unpleasant it is, for instance, I remember a friend not too long ago had been in the hospital with pancreatitis, and she said afterwards, I didn't even realize pancreatitis can kill you. So if you say somebody has pancreatitis, you might want to find a way of mentioning that this is fatal in some percentage of cases or something like that, so you know that people understand how bad it is. But as much as I've been saying, think about humans and don't just be glass jars, at the same time, there are things that we as humans understand are really freaking bad, and we don't need to be told to feel bad about them. We already do. So that's my advice. Anyway.
Thank you.
Others?
I just wanted to add to that on the reverse, there are lots of things, and I live it, that people think are really freaking bad, and you know what? They're not. So you don't want to spread that assumption.
Yes, thank you very much. That's entirely true. We will sometimes take something that is a person's lived reality that they live with quite fine every day, and we want to somehow make it a really, really big bad thing to excite people, and that's extraordinarily unkind, I think. So thank you.
Good. Well, thank you very much, James.
Any further, talk to me after.